In June of 1843, Bronson Alcott moved his wife and his 4 daughters out to a patch of farmland near Harvard, Massachusetts, to found a utopian community that he called Fruitlands. Bronson and his co-founder, Charles Lane, were transcendentalists, a movement that emerged out of Unitarianism in the 1830s. Transcendentalists believed that knowledge of the divine emerged intuitively, and that connection with nature was one of the most important ways to connect with the divine. They also tended to be more socially radical than their Unitarian forebears. Lane and Alcott founded Fruitlands, which was little more than a single farm with a fancy name, because they wanted to create a community in which folks lived pure and simple lives. They believed that many of our social institutions were corrupt and oppressive, and had decided that the only way that they could live a moral life was to remove themselves from society entirely. At the founding of Fruitlands, there were 12 adults and a handful of children, including Bronson's daughter, Louisa May, who grew up to be an author who wrote such well-known books as Little Women. Do you know who I'm talking about now? The small community set out to live off the land, working the field during the day and at night having long philosophical conversations. In order to live a truly pure and moral life, there were a lot of rules at Fruitlands. They didn't eat or use any animal products or products made by slaves. They wore linen only and ate fruit, vegetables, and grains. They worked the fields without any help from horses or mules, and they believed that that too was an exploitation of the animals' labor. There were 10 men and 2 women at Fruitlands, a motley crew. This number dwindled as the months went by. Some decided that the lifestyle didn't work for them. Others were expelled from the community for violating rules. One of the 2 women, Anne Page, was expelled for eating a piece of fish. Although they had dreamed of Fruitlands being a real and thriving community, it became an increasingly insular group. It fell to Abby Alcott, the remaining woman, to cook and clean and do all the other chores that were considered women's work in the 1840s. When a visitor asked if there were any beasts of burden at Fruitlands, it is said that Abby Alcott replied, "Only one woman." So it is not surprising then that it was Abby Alcott who abandoned the Fruitlands project long before her husband was willing to let it go. As the first winter set in, it became very clear to Abby that they were not going to survive the winter in their thin linen clothes with too little food and firewood set aside. And fed up with all the work while the men talked philosophy and worrying about her children's survival on the top of it, Abby did what any mother might do and took her 4 children away from Fruitlands in the dead of winter and moved them back to town. The rest of the remaining 3 members of the community soon followed. It was Bronson Alcott who was the very last hanging on to it. But the Fruitlands experiment never made it through the winter. Fruitlands was just one of the many failed utopian experiments during this time. There was a sense among these philosophically minded men that one could, in fact, retreat from the flawed society in which they lived and build a perfect world from the ground up. In many ways, it was a very individualistic way of thinking about fixing the world. Fed up with a society that they believed was too corrupt to fix, Bronson and others removed themselves from society altogether, hoping to create perfection by building an entirely new society. Rather than working to change the systems that they objected to, they simply walked away. I am reminded of stories like Fruitlands every time I hear someone say that they're going to move to Canada if the presidential election goes the wrong way. It's the same basic idea, right? You get so fed up with a country that is hate-filled and corrupt that you simply walk away. Now, I know that most folks say this in jest, but I do wonder what it says about our understanding of our responsibility to the world. What do we owe one another? What do we owe our children and our children's children? What do we owe the person who lives down the block or on the other side of the country? And when we opt out, who really wins? There are all kinds of different strategies out there for creating social change, for building the world we dream about. Some are subtle, some are blatant, some try to reform broken systems, and others try to dismantle them. All of these strategies are based on the idea that, as we know, the world isn't perfect, that we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't gotten to the world we dream about. All of these strategies are based on the idea that we live in a world that is broken and that we have a responsibility to try to heal that brokenness. People talk about this brokenness in many different ways, but my personal favorite is the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, which literally means to repair or heal the world. Now, some of you may have been here last year when Sandra and I did a story about tikkun olam. It involved puffballs. Do you remember it now? And a great shining light and a cosmic accident back at the beginning of time. The mystical version of tikkun olam says that there was this great shining light at the beginning of time that shattered into 1,000 pieces, which we represented with puffballs when we did our story. And it is our work, in fact, our very purpose, to find those pieces of shattered light and to put them back together again. It is our work to heal this broken world. Now, I love this story both because it is a very clear call to heal our world and because it places us in the midst of a long line of healers. We are not the first to engage in this work, and nor will we be the last. The healing of our world is not a task that we will finish in this lifetime, but neither is it a task that we can ignore. And we are not doing this work alone. It's not just me or you that is tasked with healing the world, but all of us, every single one of us. I would also say that it's a categorically different task than that of trying to perfect the world. For one thing, the idea of perfecting the world is based on the idea that we actually know what a perfect world would look like. This is what Bronson Alcott and the Fruitlands crew believed. They decided what a perfect world would look like, and then they tried to embody it from the ground up. And as with so many things, that perfect world wasn't so perfect after all. The notion of a perfect world also gets in the way when we're unsure of what perfection might look like, and when we're too focused on the perfect to do anything to work for the good. I see this often with well-meaning, thoughtful folks like you all who come to this church. There's a sense that we must be absolutely sure of the perfect way to make change or bring more justice to the world before we can even take one step forward. We spend hours talking, arguing, wordsmithing, and sometimes never get around to doing anything that can actually create change. This notion of perfection, as Elizabeth pointed out, is rather suspect. Can any of us really perfect the world? Certainly not in our lifetime. And how often does our desire for the perfect get in the way of the real work that we can and must do towards healing? I recently came across a modern-day conversation about Tikkun Olam in the book Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist by Rachel Cohn. They are discussing whether or not the world is better off now than it was years ago, and how to fix the brokenness that abounds. And one of them says, maybe it isn't that we're supposed to find the pieces and put them back together. Maybe we are the pieces. Maybe what we're supposed to do is come together, and that's how we stop the breaking. Now, I don't know if Rachel Cohn meant for this to be a profound religious statement when she wrote it, but it struck me as deeply and profoundly true. When I think about healing the world, it's not about finding inanimate things and putting them back together again. It's about being in relationship with one another, across barriers of race, class, culture, religion. Healing the world cannot be done in isolation. It's the work we do together and by coming together. This was the flaw in the Fruitlands story. The Alcotts and other members of Fruitlands were not even trying to heal the corruption in the world. They were simply removing themselves from it, creating an insular group more focused on what they ate and wore than dismantling the systems they found to be corrupt. They were ignoring their responsibility to heal the world and instead trying to create a separate and perfect world for themselves. Instead of trying to heal by remaining in relationship, they were trying to perfect by severing the relationship. It's the same flaw in the plan that would prevent most of us from actually moving to Canada if the election doesn't go our way. If we simply remove ourselves from the broken system, we can no longer have any role in trying to heal it. And it's the same flaw when we sit around trying to come up with the perfect plan and don't ever engage. It's the same flaw that comes into play when we struggle to create perfectly worded statements of support and never get around to joining the real struggle in the streets. It's the navel-gazing type of social justice that holds us back from doing the real, messy work of dismantling the many systems of oppression and beginning to heal our world. So if we are the pieces, what does healing the brokenness of our world look like? Sometimes I think it looks like small acts of relationship building. One of the reasons I think it's so important for this congregation to be a part of the Crop Walk is that it's one of the only interfaith social justice efforts that happens here in Nashua. It's one of the only chances that we get as a congregation to come together with people of different faiths and build relationships founded on a common goal of ending hunger. Sure, we aren't going to end hunger that day, but we are doing the slow, relational work that is healing to our world. Sometimes healing the brokenness looks like small acts of resistance. It is speaking out against the rampant rhetoric of hatred that fuels the illusion of our separateness. It's an entire high school band kneeling during the national anthem to protest systemic racism. It's marching together in the streets and disrupting the status quo. And sometimes healing the world does indeed mean imagining together what the world might look like and trying to change ourselves to move closer to the world we dream about. As Victoria Safford says, once you have glimpsed the world as it might be, as it ought to be, as it is going to be, however that vision appears to you, it is impossible to live compliant and complacent in the world as it is. If we are truly the pieces, we are called to come together to heal our world. We are called to participate and engage. We are called to be in community even with those that we don't agree with. We are called to the macro work to dismantling systems of oppression, to changing the very foundations of our society. And we are called to the micro work, to building relationships with our neighbors, to confronting our own privilege. We cannot live compliant and complacent anymore in the world as it is. We must do our part, however large or small, to heal the profound brokenness of this world and begin to build together the world that we dream about. May it be so.
There's a place in your heart, and I know that it is love. And this place can be much brighter than tomorrow. And if you really try, you'll see there's no need to cry. In this place, you'll see there's no hurt or sorrow. There are ways to get there if you care enough for the living. Make a little space to make a better place. Heal the world, make it a better place for you and for me and the entire human race. There are people dying. If you care enough for the living, make a better place for you and for me. If you want to know why, there's a love that cannot lie. Love is strong, it only cares for joyful giving. If we try, we shall see. In this bliss we cannot feel fear or dread. We stop existing and start living. We could live as always. Love's enough for us growing. Make a better world. Make a better